No one leaves the temple. That's all he said, barefoot, sweeping the stone floor, while 8 armored bounty hunters aimed plasma rifles at his back. They had battled cyborg beasts, ambushed warlords, and melted through war bunkers across 3 galaxies, but here in the ruins of Earth, their greatest mistake was underestimating a monk with a broom. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and incense. This far north, the snow never fully melted, leaving the path to the temple slick with patches of frost and wind-blown dust. The bounty ship, a brute of a vessel, sat half embedded in the slope behind them, steam hissing off its overheated landing struts. It had taken them 3 days of deep skin searching, cross-referencing old planetary heat signatures, and 1 unfortunate ground unit fatality to confirm the fugitive was here. He wasn't hiding underground. He wasn't cloaked. He was out front. Sweeping. Krelth, the team's leader and a decorated war hunter from the Krylos campaigns, stepped forward, visor scanning the seemingly frail human. He was old. That much was obvious. Gray robes wrapped his narrow frame, loose at the sleeves, his bald head catching the sunlight like polished stone. Krelth's bio-readout displayed a single anomaly, no cybernetic trace, no weapons detected, and a heartbeat so slow it resembled pre-sedation stasis. You! Krelth barked, aiming his blaster. You've been harboring a Class Red fugitive. Step aside. The monk didn't pause. He continued sweeping the same 3 square feet of stone, as if Krelth's voice were merely another breeze rolling down the mountain. Then came that sentence again, without even looking up. No one leaves the temple. The younger recruits laughed. One pulled out a stun net, and cracked it open with a grin. He high on incense or just senile? Muttered Jock, tapping his helmet's side feed to record the encounter. He wanted a viral clip. Sweep in death. Monk style. Krelth didn't laugh. Something about the man's posture gnawed at him. He was no warrior, not physically. Yet his presence pushed back against their formation like a slow, unrelenting tide. The hunter to Krelth's left adjusted his stance. The ice beneath his boots cracked, not because he moved, but because the temperature dropped. Krelth's internal HUD glitched briefly, as if the system couldn't fully capture what it was looking at. No tech interference. Just wrong readings. We're not here to play riddles with monks, Krelth said. You will give up the fugitive, or we will burn this sanctuary down, brick by brick. The monk stopped sweeping. He turned to them at last. You already burned it down. Long before you got here. Krelth blinked. What does that mean? The monk stepped aside, gesturing into the open-air temple. Through ancient archways and marble pillars, the interior revealed itself, vast, quiet, full of light and shadow. Not abandoned. Preserved. There were faded murals on the walls, humans in stances that didn't resemble any military training. There were broken weapons displayed on altars. And statues. So many statues. All of them different. None had eyes. Krelth gave the hand signal. 2 hunters advanced, scanning for traps. Nothing. Then 3 more entered. They spread, took corners, weapons raised, movements tight. Still nothing. Then came the first door closing. Not slamming. Not mechanical. It sounded like a heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. Final. The rookies spun around. The archway was gone. A wall stood where they had entered just seconds ago. Krelth's HUD went static for 2 seconds. By the time it recalibrated, 2 of his men had vanished from internal location tracking. One was outside range. The other was still within 10 meters, but below them. Underground. What is this place? Jock hissed, his voice higher now, jittering. I'm losing signal. Are they jamming us? No, said the monk from behind them. The temple doesn't like arrogance. Another door closed. 1 more hunter down. The hallway shifted. Statues they'd passed moments ago were now gone, replaced by others. Faces they didn't recognize. Some looked alien. One bore Krelth's own armor, cracked through the visor. And on the floor beside it, scorch marks. Not new. Ancient. Krelth grabbed the monk by the collar, yanking him off his feet. Or tried to. His arms stopped mid-motion, frozen. Not by force. Not by pain. It just wouldn't move. The monk didn't flinch. He looked Krelth in the eye. Not defiant. Not smug. Just disappointed. I buried my rage in this place, the monk whispered. And still it grows. The temple listens. It learns. And when you came for me, it decided to remember what it was built for. Krelth shoved backward, finally breaking the strange paralysis. He opened comms to the ship. Static. He rerouted to the satellite drone. Dead. He called every backup frequency they'd been drilled with. Nothing but silence. Then, a sound, not from a device, but from the walls. Laughter. Children. Echoing, distant. Followed by screams. Followed by silence. Jock tried to leave. He ran toward what looked like a new exit, but before he reached it, the ground beneath him folded in like origami. No blood. No dust. Just gone. Folded into nothing. Krelth roared. He fired at the wall. The plasma bolts didn't explode, they sank into the marble as if it were mud. He switched to explosive rounds. No impact. No reaction. The monk sat down cross-legged, in the center of the chamber. You came here thinking violence is power. But here, violence has memory. Krelth aimed one more time. His targeting system highlighted the monk's skull with a clean-shot confirmation. He hesitated. Why? The man hadn't lifted a hand against them. Yet 5 of his team were gone. And this old fool hadn't moved. Who are you? Krelth asked finally. What is this? The monk didn't answer at first. He took a breath. The kind of breath one takes not to calm nerves, but to remember pain. I was peace once, he said. Then they made me war. Then I chose silence. Where's the fugitive? Krelth shouted. I am the fugitive, the monk said quietly. But not from your laws. From my own past. The air around them shifted. The temple lights dimmed. And on the far wall, a mural changed, fresh paint now showing a new figure. Krelth. Alone. Bleeding. On his knees. Reaching for the sky. No one leaves the temple, the monk said again. Unless the temple allows it. And then, Krelth's weapon powered down on its own. All systems flatlined. And the doors, every last one of them, vanished. Only stone remained. Thick. Ancient. Unmoving. That was when the real test began. The silence inside the temple was not the kind of quiet that came from emptiness. It was full, thick with something unseen, like the air itself had weight. The kind of silence that made your heartbeat sound too loud, too exposed. Krelth didn't speak, didn't gesture, didn't even blink for several seconds. His training told him to control the situation, to regain tactical positioning, to regroup and reevaluate the threat. But none of those protocols applied here. There was no map, no known exit, no tactical readings that made sense. And 5 of his hunters were gone, 3 confirmed missing, 1 folded into a wall, 1 likely dead from a collapsing corridor. Only he and 2 others remained in visible range, their boots pressed into stone that no longer matched the hallway they entered through. What had once been a wide corridor now narrowed into a series of doorless chambers, connected by open archways that pulsed with shifting shadows. The monk sat calmly in the same spot where he'd spoken his strange riddles, eyes closed now, hands resting on his knees like he had all the time in the universe. Scan everything again, Krelth whispered into his calm, barely trusting the sound of his own voice. Thermal, life forms, structural anomalies. His second, Vexra, complied. Her helmet's scanning module clicked faintly as it moved through cycles. After a few seconds, she hissed through clenched teeth. Nothing. No heat signatures beyond us. The monk barely registers. His vitals are so low, he should be dead. And the structure, it's moving. Moving? She nodded, pointing a finger toward the stone floor. Every few seconds by about 3 centimeters. Real slow. Like it's breathing. Krelth didn't reply. The walls, too, seemed subtly altered. The mural they'd passed moments ago, where warriors once stood in stances of honor, had changed. The warriors now faced away, backs turned, heads bowed. Some were gone. Statues shifted as well, ever so slightly. He looked over his shoulder at one that resembled a Shari executioner from the Fifth War, mouth open in a frozen scream, sword buried in its own chest. Krelth was sure it hadn't been there when they first entered. He reached for his plasma blade, clicked it once. Nothing. Dead. Just like his rifle. Just like every weapon system on his suit. Even the kinetic shield around his chest piece had faded, exposing the raw alloy beneath. Nothing works in here, Bexra said, echoing his thoughts. We're fighting a ghost. The third survivor, a bulky alien named Drog with tusks jutting from his lower jaw and arms like construction girders, finally snapped. He turned toward the monk and shouted, "Enough of this trickery!" Then lunged forward with his hydraulic fist. It was a punch meant to break rock, designed for demolishing walls, cracking skulls, leveling machinery. But as his punch neared the monk's chest, the air rippled. A transparent pulse of force met his arm midair. There was no visible shield. No sound. Just a sudden stop. Drog's body convulsed like he'd punched solid steel with his bare bone. His arm went limp, shoulder dislocated, muscles twitching. He dropped to his knees, gasping. The monk opened his eyes. "I did not strike you," he said gently. "The temple did." Krelth moved to grab Drog, pulling him back to a wall. He looked down. The floor under Drog's knees now glowed faintly with blue etching, glyphs that weren't there seconds ago. They pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm, in sync with the monk's breath. "This place," Bexra muttered. "It's not reacting to us, it's judging us." Krelth looked up. The monk said nothing, only watched. Calm. Patient. Like a storm waiting behind glass. "We're not prisoners," Krelth said, more to himself than anyone else. "We're test subjects." They moved deeper, not because they wanted to, but because the path behind them had vanished again. The room sealed like lips pressed shut. The only light came from torches on the walls, though no fire burned in them. The flames were illusion, maybe projection, maybe something older. The scent of herbs grew stronger. They passed the garden that wasn't there before, trees in full bloom, leaves rustling without wind. Birds flitted silently between branches, their wings making no noise, eyes black and still. Vexra reached out to one branch, and it crumbled to ash. Just illusion. Or memory. Then they found the first message. It wasn't on a wall. It floated, letters formed in midair like smoke, shifting shapes, settling into galactic common language. Krelth read it aloud. "Here, every violent thought echoes louder than footsteps." He felt the words in his spine. Not metaphor. Literal. The moment he thought about drawing a weapon again, the floor beneath him rippled, and a soft cracking sound whispered in his ear, as if the temple anticipated betrayal and responded before action. Drog muttered something in his native tongue, staring at a mirror across the room. Only it wasn't a mirror. It showed him, but different. Scarred. Older. Holding the body of someone small. A child. Dead. "No," he said. "That's not real. That's not real." The mirror didn't blink. "Who did you lose?" the monk's voice asked, though he hadn't followed them. It echoed in the chamber like it was coming from the stones themselves. "Shut up," Drog snarled. "You don't know anything about me. Only what you carry." Drog roared and charged the mirror, smashing it to pieces. But instead of shattering into shards, the surface peeled back like paper and reformed behind him. The image returned. The child still dead. The guilt still alive. "This place forces you to face your sins," Bexra said, her own voice trembling now. "It doesn't kill you with force. It kills you with truth." They reached a chamber with 8 doors, each one carved with a different symbol. Fire. Water. Wind. Earth. War. Peace. Memory. Silence. Only one opened. Silence. They stepped in, unsure whether they had a choice at all. Inside was nothing. Not darkness. Not light. Just stillness. No sound. No breath. Even Kreltha's own heartbeat felt muted, like he was underwater. Then came the whisper. From everywhere. You do not pass through the temple. The temple passes through you. The silence broke. The room collapsed into movement again, doors slamming, air rushing, symbols glowing. The chamber expelled them backward, literally spat them out into a new hallway. They landed hard. Dizzy. Dry-mouthed. And when they looked up, the monk was there again, sweeping, as if no time had passed. You're still here, Krelth said hoarsely. The monk stopped sweeping. Are you? They looked back. The path they came through was gone. And the corridor behind them no longer led to the silenced door. It led deeper now. The glyphs beneath their feet read a new phrase. Truth is the only weapon that works here. Krelth stared at the monk, eyes burning with questions, confusion, and something he didn't want to admit. Fear. And still the monk swept, slow and steady, while the temple waited for the next mistake. Drog didn't sleep that night. None of them did. Though the sky beyond the ancient temple turned dark and the stars cast cold light through the high windows, the temple's interior refused to acknowledge time. There was no change in temperature, no shift in lighting, no cycle of rest. It was as if the entire structure had disconnected itself from reality. Vexra had stopped trying to contact the ship 2 hours ago. Her gear was drained, her weapons still dead, and the blinking diagnostics of her armor now displayed nonsense, coordinates that didn't exist, timestamps set thousands of years in the past. Krelth hadn't spoken in a long time. He sat near the outer edge of the last chamber they had emerged from, watching the monk, who now lit incense near a pedestal where 7 small bowls sat, each filled with a different element: water, sand, oil, ashes, flower petals, bone dust, and what looked like shattered metal. The monk moved slowly, as though performing a ritual. No words, no gestures toward them, only calm attention to every placement. Vexra finally broke the silence. He's not just some warrior turned monk. This whole place, this whole thing is built around him. Or maybe he was built for it. Krelth looked at her and didn't argue. He had come here believing they were hunting a fugitive. Now it was becoming clear, they were the ones being hunted. Not for death, but for exposure. This temple didn't kill. It revealed. And what it revealed wasn't something you could shoot your way out of. Drog had stopped talking altogether. His hands shook occasionally. Every time they passed a reflective surface or saw a new wall painting, it was like the temple showed him more of that child. Krelth didn't ask. Some things were better left unspoken. The monk finally turned to them. You're not the first, he said. Others came. From stars. From empires. From warships. All thought they could contain what lives here. And what lives here? Krelth asked, his voice dry, almost hoarse. Your answers, said the monk. Before they could react, the stone beneath their feet pulsed again, a faint hum rising in the air. The chamber brightened, not with sunlight, but with memory. Around them, holographic images flickered to life, half-transparent illusions woven into space. Warriors appeared, not alien, not human, but something older. Hooded figures practicing martial forms, moving with grace and deadly fluidity. One struck a pillar with 2 fingers, and the entire column split cleanly, then repaired itself in reverse. This was once a school, the monk said. A temple of peace that trained protectors. Until the galaxy discovered us. The holograms shifted. Explosions tore through the temple. Ships hovered above. Troopers, recognizably alien, rushed in, burning relics, shooting statues. And then one lone figure remained, surrounded. A younger version of the monk. Eyes blazing. Robes torn. Covered in blood that wasn't his. I stopped them, he said, not proudly. But not before they broke everything this place was built for. Vexra stepped closer to the projection. You were a weapon. I was the last disciple, the monk corrected. But I carried the war in my veins like fire. I turned this temple into a trap, because I no longer trusted peace. He looked at Drog. You saw your war. Your regret. That is the price of entry. He looked at Vexra. You've seen the war in others. But never in yourself. That will change soon. And then his eyes locked with Krelth. But you buried yours under metal and glory. Krelth stepped back, instinct tightening every muscle. The monk didn't move. Yet Krelth felt like he had been punched in the stomach. I did what I had to. Krelth snapped. Every soldier makes sacrifices. Every leader carries death. The monk nodded slowly. Yes. But only a few ask who they became in the process. Before Krelth could answer, the ground cracked, not violently, but like a blooming flower. A stairway opened, spiraling downward. The monk gestured toward it. Below are your memories. The parts you locked away to remain useful. Go. Drog took a step back. No. I've seen enough. I don't want more. The monk said nothing. He didn't have to. The temple responded for him. The wall behind Drog shimmered and showed the child again, but this time, the child turned its head and stared directly at him. Drog collapsed to his knees, breath hitching in his throat. Vexra went first. Her expression unreadable, face pale but eyes hard. She descended the stairs in silence. Krelth followed, not because he wanted to, but because he knew there was no other path. The staircase wound impossibly deep. The air grew warmer. The walls smoother. Glyphs pulsed on every surface, lines of language that none of their translators could decode. Yet somehow, Krelth understood them. They weren't words. They were feelings. Betrayal. Guilt. Vengeance. Hope. Every step forward made his chest tighter. When they reached the bottom, there was no door, only a wide chamber. In its center stood 3 mirrors. Each one reflected a different version of the person who stood before it. Vexra stared into hers. The left mirror showed her as a peacekeeper, unarmed, rescuing children from a bombed village. The middle one showed her accepting a bounty on the same village 5 days earlier. The right one showed her shooting her own brother in a uniform she now wore. She stepped away, face twisted in agony. Krelth stepped in front of his. His reflections didn't lie. The left mirror showed him giving an order to execute unarmed prisoners during the Varnax rebellion. He had done it to send a message. The middle mirror showed him standing silent while one of his subordinates tortured an alien elder. The right mirror showed him younger, crying in a locker room, holding a medal he knew he didn't earn. He looked away. I buried that, he whispered. The monk's voice echoed through the chamber. But you carried the weight anyway. Krelth turned, fists clenched. What do you want from us? Nothing, said the monk. What do you want from yourselves? That question sank into the floor like a stone in water. There was no clear answer. Not yet. Then came the choice. Another staircase appeared, this one going up, illuminated by soft white light. And next to it, another door, dark, humming with low energy. Vexra walked toward the white staircase. She didn't hesitate. Drog stayed where he was, trembling. Krelth looked at the 2 paths. What happens if we take the dark one? He asked. The monk didn't answer. He only said, That is the path you wrote. The other is the one you have to earn. Krelth stood there for a long time, staring at both options. His heart beat slowly. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Eventually, he walked toward the light. Not because it promised safety, but because for the first time in years, he didn't want to be who he was anymore. And behind them, the mirrors remained, waiting for the next visitor to look too closely. When Krelth stepped into the white corridor, the light neither blinded him nor warmed him. It simply existed, neutral and constant, like it had been waiting. Each footstep made no sound, as though the floor absorbed even the memory of noise. Behind him, Drog still hadn't moved. He'd been left kneeling before his own reflection, caught in some silent war with the past. Krelth didn't look back. If Drog rose, he would have to do it alone. If he didn't, then the temple had claimed another soul, not with violence, but with truth. The corridor ahead narrowed, not physically, but emotionally. It felt tighter, more personal, like the walls themselves were beginning to recognize the person walking between them. Symbols began to fade into view on the surface of the walls. Not ancient carvings or alien glyphs this time, names. Human names. Dozens. Hundreds. Some Krelth recognized. Some were war criminals. Some were war heroes. Some were people he had personally hunted down, and some were people he had forgotten he killed. He stopped when he saw his own name. Not just once. It was written dozens of times, scattered unevenly across the wall like some obsessive artist had carved it from memory. Each one was etched differently, some deep and ragged, others neat and tiny. One had a child's handwriting. Another had slashes through it, as though someone had tried to erase it with fury. Krelth stared at the wall, expression hollow, until one of the names beneath his own caught his eye. It wasn't a soldier's name. It was the name of a boy. A civilian. 13. The son of a village elder from a rebel outpost. Krelth remembered him now. Not clearly, but enough to feel the ice in his gut. He had stood nearby when his troops fired into the crowd. He hadn't stopped them. He told himself it was part of the mission, that war demanded hard choices. The boy's name had disappeared from every official report. But it hadn't disappeared from this place. The temple remembered. It remembered all of it. Ahead, Vexra was waiting. She stood at the end of the corridor, in a round chamber with a domed ceiling covered in painted constellations. She looked different, less armored, more present. Her helmet was gone. Her expression was open, raw. No soldier's mask. Just a woman trying to breathe in a place that didn't allow lies. She didn't speak when Krelth entered. She simply nodded toward the center of the chamber where the monk now stood again, facing them. He had arrived without sound, without warning, as if he had always been there. "This is the final threshold," the monk said. "Beyond this room is the part of the temple that cannot be seen, only felt. It is where decisions are made." Krelth folded his arms, more to hide the tremble in his hands than to challenge the monk. "And what decision is that?" "To leave as you are," the monk replied. "Or stay and become something else." Krelth raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by something else?" The monk didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the room where a small square of the floor shifted, revealing a stone basin filled with still water. In the water, Krelth saw no reflection. Just darkness. Endless, deep darkness. "This place doesn't punish," the monk said quietly. "It prepares. Long ago, humans were considered the least among the stars. Primitive. Undisciplined. But then came the monks. The ones who did not fight for control but for balance. The galaxy feared them. And so it destroyed them." He turned toward them, eyes clear and calm. "I was the last," he continued. "But I could not teach peace with anger in my heart. So I turned the temple into a trial. Not for others. For myself. But now, it waits for a successor. Not a warrior. A guardian. Someone who understands what it means to confront not an enemy, but themselves." Krelth shook his head slowly. "You want one of us to become you?" "No," said the monk. "I want one of you to become more than you were." Vexra stepped forward, voice low. "What happens if no one accepts?" "Then the temple sleeps again. Until someone worthy finds it." Krelth stared at the water. He couldn't explain it, but it pulled at him. Not with magic or power, but with memory. He saw himself in the boy's face again. Not during the gunfire, but before. When the boy smiled at him from behind his father, believing, for one fragile second, that Krelth had come to help. He closed his eyes. Then opened them. "No one is worthy," he said. "Not yet," replied the monk. "But some are willing." The words hung in the air. Vexra said nothing. Her silence was not fear. It was choice. She was letting Krelth decide. Or perhaps she already had. Krelth took a breath. Then another. The deepest one in years. He stepped forward. His hand touched the water. There was no flash of light, no sudden burst of energy. Just warmth. A pulse. And then, nothing. When he looked up, the monk was gone. The chamber was empty, save for him and Vexra. Outside, the stone doors to the temple began to open. Natural light spilled in, slow and golden. And from beyond the threshold, the mountain wind returned, soft and full of birdsong. Vexra looked at him, eyes wide. Is it over? No, Krelth said. It's just begun. They walked outside, not as fugitives, not as hunters, but as something else entirely. The temple behind them breathed once, quietly, as if exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. Then it went still. Watching. Waiting. Preparing for whoever dared to enter next. The mountain air hit differently on the way out. It wasn't colder or warmer, but somehow more alive. Krelth stood on the temple's stone steps, looking out over the vast valley that stretched beneath him. The trees below danced in the wind, their leaves catching the early sunlight like tiny mirrors. For the first time in his memory, he felt the silence around him wasn't threatening. It was peaceful. The ship they had arrived in was still buried in the snow, engines dormant, frost sealing its hull like nature itself was holding it in place. Vexra stepped up beside him, her armor worn but her posture lighter. No one said it out loud, but both of them knew the rest of the team would not be leaving. Drog had never emerged. The others were long gone, swallowed by illusions or truths they couldn't bear. It hadn't been violence that defeated them. It had been memory. It had been themselves. Krelth walked down the steps slowly, feeling each one beneath his boots. Every movement felt deliberate now, as if the weight of his choices followed him with every footfall. The temple did not try to stop them. It simply watched. There were no alarms, no collapsing bridges or dramatic final tests. The danger had passed. What remained was choice. Pure and unfiltered. At the bottom of the steps they paused. The clearing where they had first landed was still scorched from the ship's engines. The grass had not grown back. The earth bore the wounds of their arrival like it had been personally insulted. Krelth looked at the spot where the monk had first stood, sweeping. It seemed like a lifetime ago. He remembered the way the monk had spoken those words without fear, without malice, as if he had been stating a truth as old as the mountain itself. No one leaves the temple. Not without being changed. Vexra keyed open the ship's side panel. The system blinked to life slowly, power cells struggling after days of dormancy. She tapped through the controls in silence, checking fuel levels, scanning for any planetary interference. When she turned back toward Krelth, her expression was unreadable. Signal's clear now. The interference is gone. We can transmit again. He nodded slowly. And what do we tell them? Vexra paused. That the fugitive is gone. Krelth raised an eyebrow. You think they'll believe that? She gave a faint smirk. No. But they'll send more. They always do. Let them. Maybe the temple's still hungry. He considered her words. Not cruel. Not careless. Just honest. The kind of honesty that came from walking through memories you never wanted to face and surviving them. They didn't take off right away. Krelth stood for a long time at the edge of the clearing, staring at the forest. A few birds darted overhead, their cries echoing across the valley. It was hard to imagine that somewhere beyond those trees, entire cities still buzzed with technology and war. Ships still circled stars. Empires still schemed and crumbled. But up here, the world had stood still. Time had bent. And truth had ruled. He reached into a side pocket on his belt and pulled out the only thing he'd taken from the temple, a small, round stone, perfectly smooth, with a symbol etched faintly on one side. It wasn't language, not exactly. But he knew what it meant. It was the same feeling he'd had when he touched the basin in the final chamber. A choice. A burden. A quiet promise. Back inside the ship, Vexra reconfigured their transponder to a civilian channel. No more Hunter ID. No more priority clearance. They weren't bounty agents anymore. They weren't anything the galaxy had a name for. She set a course for neutral territory, somewhere deep in unregistered space, far from the noise. Somewhere quiet. As the engines rumbled to life, Krelth felt a strange calm settle over him. Not because they had survived, but because for the first time, survival hadn't been the point. They hadn't escaped. They had endured. As the ship lifted off, the clearing grew smaller beneath them, the temple shrinking into the mountain's shoulder like it had always been there, and always would be. No one left the temple unchanged. That much was true. But the real truth, the one the monk hadn't spoken aloud, was that the temple didn't force anything. It simply offered a mirror. Whether you looked or not was up to you. Whether you survived what you saw, that was another matter. Krelth stood behind the cockpit chair, watching the readouts scroll by as the ship cut through the thin upper atmosphere. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass. He studied it. Not his armor. Not the scars. Just the face. Older now somehow. Wiser? Maybe. But definitely different. He reached up and deactivated his combat tag on the HUD. The name disappeared. No rank. No unit. No past. Just a man flying away from a mountain that had no interest in war, but plenty to teach about it. Vexra didn't speak for a long while. When she finally did, her voice was quieter than usual. Do you think he's still in there? Krelth didn't need to ask who she meant. He is the temple, he said. Or maybe what the temple made him. She nodded slowly, eyes scanning the stars. Think he'll call us back one day? Krelth exhaled through his nose. If we lose our way again, maybe. She looked over. And if we don't? Krelth's gaze drifted back to the distant earth behind them. Then someone else will find it. Someone who needs it. The stars ahead shimmered slightly as they jumped to light speed. The hum of the engines became steady and low, like a lullaby. The galaxy stretched forward, chaotic and uncertain, filled with wars, alliances, and empires none of them could control. But somewhere, tucked deep in a forgotten mountain on an underestimated planet, stood a temple that didn't need to move or speak or fight to be dangerous. It waited, as it always had, for those bold or broken enough to seek something beyond violence. And when they came, it would not stop them at the gate. It would welcome them with silence. It would test them with truth. And if they were strong enough to face themselves, they might even walk out whole. Because in the end, the greatest warrior wasn't the one who fought hardest. It was the one who fought without raising his hands. And whispered, when the world screamed for blood, "No one leaves the temple."